A day after being dismantled in Duval, it's time to assign some more specific blame for the Colts' absolute stinker against the Jaguars. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and making us your number one listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. This is Jake Arthur alongside Zach Hicks. You know the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com, of course. On today's show, we're going to talk about what you guys are talking about. Frank Reich's on the hot seat, Chris Ballard's on the hot seat, and the Colts starter players are not playing like it. Why is that, and what needs to change? So we'll go ahead and start with the guy pulling the strings on the field, and that's Frank Reich. So, obviously, just to kind of give some backstory into this, I think you and I have both talked about this the last 24 hours. So, yes, they're 2 games into this season, and they're winless. So, it feels like an overreaction at times, but it's not when you consider the track record. This really is a continuation of those last 2 games from last season where they've come out and just it's like beating a dead horse, and they are the dead horse for the last 4 games. Totally uninspired football, not prepared to play. They're undisciplined as well. Stupid penalties, doing stupid things on the field, miscommunications in areas they don't usually have it. That all falls on the head coach.
Yeah. It's funny. I want to say this to all you guys. The moments after a game we have to record because this is our show and stuff like that. So, the emotions are high and things are going crazy. So, 24 hours later, I was able to sit down, take a deep breath, and realize this game still was utterly disastrous. My emotions and my reactions are the exact same 24 hours later. I mean, it is a game that just couldn't happen. And a lot of that comes down to the head coach. And honestly, I think I'm in the firm territory of this is very similar to like the Mike Zimmer era with the Vikings the last couple of years, where I am not going to sit here and say Mike Zimmer or Frank Reich are bad coaches. They are good coaches. I will go to my grave saying that they are good coaches and they know football and they've done a lot of good things with, their respective teams. But eventually it just gets to that breaking point. And with Zimmer and the Vikings, it happened the last couple of years, and that's why he is no longer with that team. And I think the Colts are getting close to that breaking point. We are seeing this team hit all-time lows with Frank Reich. And I know some people have said, this isn't even their worst start under Frank Reich, but this is the worst start you could have for this team. I mean, this is, on paper, this is the best team of the Frank Reich era with a quarterback that is arguably the best quarterback they've had since Andrew Luck. They have a complete team. They have a lot of good players on this team. And we'll talk about some of the holes, obviously, but this is a good roster. There's no excuse for them to come out so flat in 2 games to start this year. And obviously the 2 games at the end of last year that cost them a chance to make the playoffs. So while, yes, there's a lot of blame to go around for the coaching and the certain holes in the roster that haven't been fixed in years, there's a lot of blame that just goes right up to the head coach on this one. And Frank Reich is at the center point of that. Again, I think Frank Reich's a very good coach. I really do think he's a very good coach. And I think if he lands on his feet as like an offensive coordinator or something like that, if they don't make the playoffs this year, I think he'll be fine. But I just, at some point, something's got to change. And I know he hasn't been dealt the best hand here in Indy with constant quarterback changes and stuff like that. But eventually you just got to say that this is not working. And you can't have games like this. This game, again, it seems like an overreaction. If you guys really want to see a lot of our reaction to what happened this past game, go check out our podcast from Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, or whatever it was, because we kind of went into more detail there. But this is a game that just couldn't happen especially from a coaching standpoint. When your whole mantra this whole offseason was, we are not going to let this happen again, and then it's even worse the next season.
Worse.
It's even worse. So that is reflective of the coach, and I do think if the Colts miss the playoffs this year, I'll honestly say, without a doubt in my mind, if the Colts miss the playoffs this year, Frank Reich is 100% gone. Like Chris Ballard, I think it's not as 100%, but if the Colts miss the playoffs this year, Frank Reich's going to be the guy that's out for sure.
Yeah, I don't think anything is going to happen during the season unless these games just continue. Like, there's nothing you can do if you just look lifeless through several weeks. Like, something has to change, but I don't anticipate that being the case. This is too good of a roster for that to keep happening.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting. I did a little TV today, and I was asked about firings and stuff. And again, I obviously don't think Frank would be, but like, you have to start looking at some position coaches, because there has to be repercussions when things like this start to happen. And the defense this early in the season gets a little bit of a pass because literally everyone is new on the coaching staff there. They're still implementing their scheme and getting guys used to how they do things. Like, that is what it is. On the offensive side of the ball, you're not going to fire Reggie Wayne already. The tight ends is something to look at. The running backs have been great. Jonathan Taylor actually averaged 6 yards a carry on Sunday, believe it or not. The offensive line to me is the glaring one.
They've got Strasser.
A ton of money. Yeah, they've got a ton of money sunk into that group. They're regressing. And Strasser, this is year 3, I think, with this group. Like, there's a couple new pieces, but you've got guys who are supposed to be your dependables that are just not doing well whatsoever. And I think that's a big thing that's going to have to be looked at, because if these type of things keep happening, something has got to give, and someone will demand some sort of change.
Right. And part of the whole Frank Reich conversation to me is, he said something today, which obviously, again, anything Frank Reich says from this point on, unless they start winning, is going to fall on deaf ears. Nobody wants to hear anything he has to say, especially because he's such a calm-headed, like a level-headed type guy. That's not what the fans want to hear right now. So it's just terrible. Yeah. But, he said that teams every year go from worst to first, go from last to first place. And it's so indicative of this team that they can never be a front runner ever. And I think that falls on their head coach. And I think it falls on a lot of these players. They can never be just good. It always has to be clawing yourself out of the hole you dug into. So when they had like last season, right? Last season, the last 4 games, we'll talk about the last 4 games real quick. They had the Patriots game that they needed to win if they wanted to have a chance to make the playoffs. They come out there and they utterly dominate the Patriots outside of their own passing game, but they just dominate the Patriots. Then they have a game they had no business winning. They were the true underdogs against the Cardinals with all their players out, and they beat the Cardinals. And then when they were the favorites in those last 2 games, when they were not the underdogs, when they were expected to win, the team came out so flat and lifeless, like they expected to win, and they lost both games. So now you get into this next season where it's like, oh, things are different, but you're kind of riding the high of like, oh, we got Matt Ryan, we got Stephon Gilmore, we got Yannick Ngakoue, we're going all in, and now we have these 2 teams that we are heavily favored against, and you've got the same lifeless, dead team. And I don't think it's an issue of just playing down to their opponents. I just think you have a whole team that is based around being the underdog, that is based around being the guy who's counted out. And now that a lot of these guys aren't the underdogs anymore, Kenny Moore II is not an underdog anymore. He's a Pro Bowler. What do we get? And what we've got since then, we've got 4 really bad games. And I think a lot of that does fall on Frank Reich, because Frank Reich's always been that guy too. Frank Reich throughout his whole career as a quarterback, as a coach and everything, he excels when he's like behind and everything looks bleak. Frank Reich is able to pull through. And that's why I don't think the Colts will ever bottom out with Frank Reich. It's kind of that Norv Turner, like Mike Zimmer thing where they'll never really bottom out with a guy like Frank Reich, because he'll always be able to drag the team out of that. But do you really want it to consistently be we're dragging ourselves to the 7 or 8 seed every single season? No, because of the hole that we dig ourselves into early in the season against lesser opponents. I'm not like I really do think if they miss the playoffs this year, as of right now after this game, I'm pretty much out on Ballard and Reich. But I think if they miss the playoffs for sure this year, you have to make that change at head coach. And what we're going to talk about in our upcoming segment, personally, if they miss the playoffs this year, I would make a change at GM as well.
It'll be inexcusable, and we've said it before this. Even with full confidence in Ballard and Reich. Because we didn't envision it happening. But yeah, if they miss the playoffs, something big has to change. And we're going to run long on this, but something I definitely wanted to make note of was, so there were glaring absences with Nyheim Hines and like Paris Campbell, for example. That's two guys, if you listen to us last week, we said they would be key in a Colts win if they were to win. Like there was a recipe for those two guys to be heavily involved. Frank Reich was asked about that today, Monday. And basically, I didn't love the answer. I mean, he had a reason for it, but I didn't love it. He basically said...
It didn't make any sense. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Nyheim Hines was out of the game plan because they were trailing for a lot of the game. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. It should be the other way around.
Right. He basically said they had Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce in play. They thought they were going to play all week.
That was
and
so
then
stupid.
Both guys went out. And then so teams have the first 15 plays of a game scripted, right? And they said Nyheim was going to have 3, 4, 5 looks in this,
which he
got the first play was a slant for 19 yards. Looked great. That first drive, things were clicking until the interception, and Nyheim was a part of that. And then just the interception happened, and then everything fell apart. Nyheim stopped being used barely at all. Paris Campbell, who was the de facto top receiver because of the injuries, had 2 targets in the game. The whole game they weren't down by 20, 24 points the entire game. Like there was ample opportunity to get those things corrected, and like why they couldn't figure it out in a couple days of how to keep Nyheim involved. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense. I just had to mention that. I know we were going to run long on that.
No, I get it.
Yeah. But Zach, whenever I watch a game that makes me want to drive away into the abyss, I rely on Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. I like to think of it as Airbnb for cars. It's a pretty cool concept, to be honest with you. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, Canada, and the UK. Book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. Get a nice classic luxury car for a special event like a birthday or holiday. Or you can just find an affordable economy car if you're on a budget and you just need to get from point A to point B. Shoot, many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch those boring rental cars and find yourself driving at Turo.com. All right, Zach, we move on from Frank Reich. It's now Chris Ballard's turn. And something a lot of people said today that I think makes a lot of sense. I think he is great at finding talent. However, how that talent is built together inside a roster and how things are prioritized, that now becomes the question. Do you have any issue with that? Because I think there's some merit to it.
Yeah, I will say there's one of my buddies who's within the NFL. I'm not going to say like what he works with in the NFL, but we've been talking about this for years and stuff, very candidly talking about the biggest issue with Chris Ballard and how it could all go awry for the Colts eventually. And we're seeing it kind of right now. I think, and I completely agree with his take, and I'm purely taking his take. So if he listens to this by any chance, he'll know. But I think the biggest issue with Chris Ballard in the front office under Chris Ballard is the lack of ability to self-scout. There has not been any, like, there's a reason why the Build a Ballard series has a pretty decent hit rate. Because
it's very predictable.
It's very predictable because Chris Ballard sticks to his modes, sticks to what has worked for him in the past. And even if it doesn't work for him, he doesn't really change his preferences. Wide receiver is a great example. I mean, wide receiver is one of the premium positions in all of football. And of all the picks that they spent there and the guys that are making the roster continually, Mike Strawn, Desmond Patman, Paris Campbell. I mean, again, Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman Jr., I'm not going to throw them in there, but just all these guys, they're all the exact same receiver. They're all big-bodied receivers who have some explosion, who can, who are, again, the taller, bigger guys and stuff like that. You don't really have many of those slot guys. You don't have like Elijah Moore, for instance, is a guy that would have been drafted by Chris Ballard because of his size and stuff like that. And you see that the Colts just stick so hard to that thing with wide receiver, and it's caused them to have a lot of misses over the years. And then you could also flip that over to defensive end. At defensive end, they are so predicated on taking explosive guys with those great 10-yard splits and verticals and stuff like that. And they're not as big on other things, like they don't care about if a guy has to be explosive, but he has to be like 250 or 260, he has to be like a bigger body guy and stuff like that, and then when they took the smaller body guys, it didn't fit with the scheme that they were doing. So it was just, you got so many misses at key positions, misses at defensive end, misses at wide receiver. And those are huge positions when it comes to team building. And it's great when you're hitting on guys like Grover Stewart and you're hitting on guys like, Julian Blackmon, who I think whenever he's played has been really good. When you're hitting on guys like Quentin Nelson, but you need to hit on the premium positions to be successful. And if you're not hitting on the premium positions, you have to use free agency or trades to supplement that. Now, the trade for DeForest Buckner, for the most part, has been fine. The trade for Yannick Ngakoue so far has not been very good. But those are kind of a little too late. Like the Yannick Ngakoue one is years too late, and stuff like that. We had years of bad pass rush before they even tried to make a move like that. So I do think there is a sense of arrogance, I guess, with the Chris Ballard. I don't want to say he's arrogant because he's really not an arrogant guy. It's just the lack of self-scouting, I think, and changing their own ways has just really plagued this front office. And we're seeing it hurt the Colts time and time again. And I know that you and we always have to talk ourselves into whatever wide receiver group they're going into the season with. But at the beginning of every free agency, we're always like, oh, here's a guy they could sign. Here's a guy they could sign. And we just know it's never going to happen. And we just come to the same issues again and again in the actual season. So, I think there's a lot of issues with the Chris Ballard tenure. And I think it's bleeding over to the field now. I think he's a great talent evaluator. He finds a lot of gems. But I mean, the not using free agency whatsoever has hurt them. Not addressing key positions whenever it's been a key need, not adding depth to a roster, and just being confident in UDFAs and bottom draft picks. I think there's just a lot of issues with Chris Ballard's team building philosophy that has hurt the Colts. And again, I do think if they miss the playoffs this year, I would be okay with them letting him go, because I do think if they miss the playoffs this year, it is time to make a change.
Yeah, I think so. Again, we can't argue that he's been able to find some really good talent in places, but right. I think there's been such a reluctance to bend their own rules and make a guy fit into their locker room or whatever the issue is. Like, quarterback in this league is important. Like, sometimes you're going to have to try and move mountains to get someone in there. Right.
That's another huge issue we can talk to. Never wanting to draft a quarterback. He's been so scared to do anything draft related for a quarterback. And I'm not saying, I don't want to use the hindsight thing of, oh, he should have gone up and got Herbert, because no one knew Herbert was going to be this. Right. So I don't want to throw that. But not wanting to wait for the draft and making that rash trade for Carson Wentz or stuff teams, like that, it's just, he doesn't want to commit to a rookie, and it's hurting him.
Yeah. These teams that wind up with these really good quarterbacks, a lot of them are moving up in drafts to get them.
Right.
They're not always just staying pat and letting them fall in their lap. You got to get aggressive sometimes. Sure, it'll hamstring your draft capital for a year or two, but okay, well, you're going to have a premium quarterback. Sometimes that's just worth it.
So does trading for Carson Wentz hamstrings your draft capital,
Yeah, it costs them that first, yeah. But I think what it does when you build the roster this way and you fill it out best player available all the time, you kind of let guys fall in your lap. You take these really good players and the roster is well balanced, but you don't have that elite quarterback or, these really good players at premium positions. You just tread water and you stay mediocre for a long time. You stay relevant and you stay picking from 16 to 20 or whatever, and you're not in position to get these guys, but it's nice. You win a handful of games every year, but you're never taking that next step. And it's like you are now when you're taking a step back because you're lacking at the position. Like, look at the AFC right now. Look at the other quarterbacks. Like, even if the Colts got into the playoffs, would you have any confidence in any number of these matchups they'd be going into?
I mean, literally what we were saying all offseason is like, yeah, if you get in the dance, you have a chance. But like, we were never going to say they were the favorites in the AFC by any, even if they were, won the AFC South, we were never going to call them the favorites in the AFC. Yeah, no, I do think what's plagued the Chris Ballard, just to kind of summarize, I think what's plagued the Chris Ballard front office tenure so far, 5 years now, or going into 6 years with him, is just the lack of willingness to change, the lack of wanting to use free agency whatsoever outside of 1 or 2 signings a season, and the lack of honestly taking risks. Like, yes, there have been 2 trades where he's traded away his first round pick. Yes, he has done that. But it's been for established players. It's never taken the risk in the draft. It's never, making a huge trade for a premium position either outside of quarterback. He's at least kind of done that with veteran quarterbacks. So I don't know. I do think there's a lot of things plaguing this team, and I do think he would survive the end of this year unless this team completely bottoms out. But honestly, I'd be in the long list of people calling for him to be gone as well if they miss the playoffs. But you know how this team is performing right now. Their prize next spring might be one of those top picks in the draft. But you guys don't have to wait that long for a prize with Prize Picks. When you feel certain about something, that's a good time to hop on the Prize Picks app. For me, I'm feeling pretty certain that Patrick Mahomes is going to exceed 290.5 passing yards on Sunday against the Colts. So I'm absolutely going to uppercut that more than button. Using Prize Picks on either the computer or the mobile app is a breeze. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch, whether it's the NFL, NBA, or even cricket. Easy.
Even cricket. Speaking of which, you can hear a cricket in the background.
Yes,
so
I know. Yeah,
perfect.
This is brought to you by Cricket. This podcast is also brought to you by Cricket. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and it's that easy. And withdrawals are quick and safe. Plus, Prize Picks is currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for instant deposit match up to $100. All right, let's get to this last part of the segment because again, we kind of talked about this yesterday. Jake on the Sunday podcast after the game. I do think people are letting the players off the hook a little bit for this game. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very wrong because, yes, we can put a lot of blame on Chris Ballard for the makeup of this team. We can put a lot of blame on Frank Reich for these guys coming out flat and stuff like that. But the Colts have talent. It's not like we're going out there with I don't even want to say, I almost said Detroit Lions talent, but Detroit Lions are looking pretty good right now.
They're on fire.
They're not going out there with the tanking Miami Dolphins from a couple years ago talent, where they're actively trying to tank. They're throwing out there all-pro DeForest Buckner, all-pro Quentin Nelson, Pro Bowl Ryan Kelly, I think Pro Bowl alternate Braden Smith, Pro Bowler Yannick Ngakoue, past Pro Bowler. I don't think he was last year. Kenny Moore was a Pro Bowler. All these guys are players who have had a lot of success in this league, guys who have been Pro Bowlers, guys who have been towards the top of their position, and they're just not performing whatsoever. Like Yannick Ngakoue and DeForest Buckner right now have 1 QB hit, no sacks, and 4 pressures in 2 games against 2 offensive lines that are they're fine, but these aren't great offensive lines. No one's saying the Jaguars and Texans have the best offensive lines in football. So I think there's some real issues with the players in this team. And I think for me, it kind of goes back to the underdog mentality. These guys have always been underdogs their whole life. And now they're starting to get credit. They're starting to get big paydays and they're starting to get hype. And I don't think that that's a position that they're typically used to playing from. I don't want to speak to someone else's mentality because I just don't know these players personally that well. But I do think we're starting to see a lot of that on the field, especially from, a player like Kenny Moore II, where his play has dropped off drastically since he became a Pro Bowler last year.
Yeah, I think something that's confused me is how they're playing again, it looks like they're not prepared whatsoever, right?
Right.
At no point do they look like they're in control. They're getting just trounced. They're getting out schemed, out coached, outplayed the whole time. And so they say, practices at an all-time intensity and this and that. And
Right.
it's like, okay, how does that make sense? Like, I don't doubt it. Like, sure, their practices are probably great, but like, what is then happening on game day? Like,
yeah,
are you just most excited to play against your friends and your teammates in practice? You don't want to play these dudes that it matters whether you win or lose. I don't get that.
Yeah.
It's the most baffling thing to me. Like, I don't have any good answers. Like, there's only a few guys who we know are really good who are playing like it. And I just don't understand. Like, or have these guys just hit a wall? Like, is it this underdog now we're expected to perform well thing? I just legit.
That's my only theory. It's like my only theory. I don't know, because we're just seeing it's not one or two guys. And again, I do think that is a coaching issue. I do think that is something that goes on the head coach. But again, these are grown men. These are not high school players or college kids.
Mm-hmm.
You don't I don't care who your coach is. You shouldn't need a coach to motivate you to play or to come out there. Like, yes, the scheme could be bad. Yes, the play designs could be bad. Yes, underperforming. There could be other underperforming players. But at the end of the day, if you're a star player, if you're an all-pro player, a star player, you have to have some pride to at least go out there at a game like this and try to and at least do something. Again, I know DeForest Buckner and Kenny Moore II were both hurt in this game. I know they were both banged up going into this game, but if you told me after the game that those are one's an all-pro, one's a Pro Bowler, I would laugh at you. I did not see that whatsoever. And we haven't seen that from either of them this year. Again, with Yannick Ngakoue, if you told me that he's hit over 10 sacks every single year of his career, these past two games, I would be like, how does he even get close to the quarterback? And then on the offensive side, you told me that the Colts have 3 Pro Bowl level or all-pro level linemen. I mean, that would be the most absurd thing I've ever heard, because this offensive line looks like the worst in football, and there's no excuse for it to look this bad. And maybe that is a coaching thing, but we're also getting players that are just not playing whatsoever to their talent level. And I do think, again, these are grown men. Some of the blame has to go on them. These players are underperforming, and maybe they just need a new coaching staff to light a fire under them, but I'm not going to just let them off the hook for this. I mean, if you're getting shut out, it's not just that your coaches are bad. It's also that you got smacked around on the field. The coaches can only do so much. The GM can only do so much. But if you're getting shut out, 24-0, the Colts were not in this game by halftime. I mean, it didn't feel like the Colts were going to somewhat be in this game by halftime. And it was 14-0, and it felt like the game was insurmountable. They were getting beat down that bad. That's a player thing too. The players deserve plenty of blame. And honestly, I don't even want to absolve Matt Ryan either. Matt Ryan looked terrible. No. Yeah. Because I know a lot of the comments were about Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan and all that stuff. Matt Ryan looked terrible. And I'm comfortable saying that for someone who's very high on Matt Ryan in the offseason. And I still think Matt Ryan will kind of figure it out this year. And I think they'll be okay there. He was terrible. And he's a big part of this as well, especially for a guy who we got all those articles with The Athletic and all that stuff about how the leadership is different and how, oh my gosh, he's holding us accountable, which, oh, wow, you guys need someone to hold you accountable. Wow, great article. But we just, where has that been? How do you get shut out by the Jaguars with this new quarterback that's holding you all accountable and getting in your face and stuff? So I do think, again, the coaching, the GM, they deserve to be on the hot seat and they deserve their criticism, but don't let these players off the hook, because if you're getting smacked around like that, especially by a team who, by all consensus, is not a top tier team in the league, there's something wrong with your players on the field as well.
Yeah. And that's another thing for me is they've spent all this time the last 3-4 years building this locker room that's supposed to self-police. It's supposed to hold each other accountable. How are they looking this uninspired then? They say they don't hear it, but they hear this outside noise. They probably don't hear us, but they hear the outside noise. It's been deafening this week already. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a players only meeting or like something like the leadership council.
The fix to all fixes. The thing that fixes everything. The players
the
only
unfortunate
meeting.
The unfortunate part of it is it's had to happen the last couple of years at some point.
You have your DeForest Buckner get up there and he says 4 words and then everybody walks out. That's the players only meeting. But man.
Well, I was going to ask you something real quick. So in relation to the players, now some of these guys aren't just going to get replaced in the lineup. Like you're not ripping Kenny Moore out of there and replacing him right now.
No.
But what's a few moves you would make now or very soon? Like you got to think like Bernard Ryman getting in there at left tackle's coming soon. Whatever you need to do to get Isaiah Rodgers on the field, do it.
Oh gosh, like, Isaiah Rodgers Sr. stuff, man. I don't know why he's not. I mean, just give me a snap at this point. Isaiah Rodgers Sr. has not given up one catch this year. He's been their best pass defender. Right. He's been awesome. But no, Isaiah Rodgers Sr. Get him out there at least a little bit because I mean, this defense has one turnover forced in 2 games. Why is Isaiah Rodgers Sr. sitting on the bench? This is your turnover guy. I mean, come on. But no, I think
Leonard's not out there. He's your main turnover guy. Leonard's not out there. Kenny Moore's not doing it. Rodgers is your other one.
Yeah, I think
maybe
getting more. I think getting more Dio Dambo out there. I think he's been at least showing some energy in his couple snaps. But again, he's barely playing right now. So it's like, what do we even know? Mike Strawn out there more than some of these other receivers. Like, why was Des Patman getting so many snaps over Mike Strawn
and targets?
Yeah, like I don't know. Bernard Ryman's an obvious one. And honestly, I do think you have to consider Will Fries over Danny Pinter because Will Fries might not be the best run blocker, but he's going to be much better at pass pro than what we've seen like out of Danny Pinter and the right side of this line. So, I mean,
at this point, I don't think it even matters if you're just average and treading water, as long as you're not a detriment. That's all they need right now is someone who's not hurting.
Yeah. I don't know right now, though. I don't know. It's a mess.
So we'll probably toss more stuff around that this week, but that's it for today, guys. Hang with us the rest of this week as we throw this one in the rearview mirror and look ahead to the blitzkrieg that might be coming in the form of Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.
In the comments of this YouTube video, please put your score predictions for this upcoming game. Let's have some fun with it. Be sure to follow us. Be sure to follow us on social media at Jake Arthur NFL, on Twitter at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter, and at Locked On Colts on Twitter. Also subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a very lively conversation going on Sunday's podcast of like 200 comments on there on Carson Wentz and coaching stuff and Duval's just thrown in there. I mean, it's a very fun conversation, so please join.
You guys love the county that your team is in. Cool.
Yes. And wherever you guys listen to your podcast, rate, review, subscribe, and keep making the Locked On Colts your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow.